call this meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Roll call.
Ms. Bibla? Here. Mr. Champy?
Here.
Mrs. Chaitor Zagoric? Here. Mr. Webby?
Here.
Mrs. McCurdy?
Here.
Mrs. Campbell? Here. Mr. Nardone?
Here.
Mr. Boone?
Here.
And Mr. Macri?
Here.
9 members present.
The executive session was held before the Reorganization Board meeting tonight, December 5th. We'll move on to the school board organization. All seats are vacant.
At this time, I'll be seeking a motion for the election of a temporary president.
I nominate Anna Bibla.
I second.
A second. Nomination by Mr. Boone, second by Mrs. McCurdy. Roll call.
Ms. Bibla?
Yes.
Mr. Champy?
Yes.
Mrs. Chaitor Zagoric?
Yes.
Mr. Webby?
Yes.
Mrs. McCurdy?
Yes.
Mrs. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Nardone?
Yes.
Mr. Boone?
Yes.
And Mr. Macri?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Ms. Bibla, please take the temporary president's chair.
I'll be seeking nominations for the election of school board president.
I nominate John Macri. Second.
Roll call?
Mrs. Bibla?
Yes.
Mr. Champy?
Yes.
Mrs. Chaitor Zagoric?
Yes.
Mr. Webby?
Yes.
Mrs. McCurdy?
Yes.
Mrs. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Nardone?
Yes.
Mr. Boone?
Yes.
And Mr. Macri?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Mr. Macri, you're back in charge.
There we go.
Good job.
Thank you all.
That was great.
I will now seek a nomination and motion for board vice president.
I nominate Barry Boone.
Second?
Roll call.
Mrs. Bibla?
Yes.
Mr. Champy?
Yes.
Mrs. Chaitor Zagoric?
Yes.
Mr. Webby?
Yes.
Mrs. McCurdy?
Yes.
Mrs. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Nardone?
Of course, yes.
Mr. Boone?
Yes.
And Mr. Macri?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Move on. We'll seek a motion and second for board treasurer.
I nominate John Webby.
Second?
Roll call.
Was that Mrs. Campbell or Mrs.?
It doesn't matter.
You
can pick.
Okay. Mrs. Bibla?
Yes.
Mr. Champy?
Yes.
Mrs. Chaitor Zagoric?
Yes.
Mr. Webby?
Yes.
Mr. McCurdy?
Yes.
Mrs. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Nardone?
Yes.
Mr. Boone?
Yes.
And Mr. Macri?
Yes.
Motion carried.
We'll now move on to board secretary. I seek a motion and nomination.
I nominate Anna Bibla.
I second. Roll call.
Mrs. Bibla?
Yes.
Mr. Champy?
Yes.
Mrs. Chaitor Zagoric?
Yes.
Mr. Webby?
Yes.
Mrs. McCurdy?
Yes.
Mrs. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Nardone?
Yes.
Mr. Boone?
Yes.
And Mr. Macri?
Yes.
Motion carried.
We'll now seek a motion and a second for board representative to the Wilkes-Barre CTC. This is a 3-year term position.
I nominate Mrs. Chaitor Zagoric.
Second.
Roll call.
Mrs. Boone?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Bibla.
Yes.
Mr. Champy?
Yes.
Mrs. Chaitor Zagoric?
Yes.
Mr. Webby?
Yes.
Mrs. McCurdy?
Yes.
Mrs. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Nardone?
Yes.
Mr. Boone?
Yes.
And Mr. Macri?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you to all board members for taking on positions, much appreciated. Right. We'll take any public testimony on agenda items. Please come to the podium and be reminded your last name and address and limited to 3 minutes. Are there any agenda item? No. Seeking none, I will make a motion to adjourn tonight's reorganization meeting. Our next regularly scheduled committee meeting is Thursday, January 9th, 2025 at 4 p.m. And then the next regular board meeting would be January 16th, 2025 on this campus. Do I have a motion for reorganization meeting adjournment?
Motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. We're going to call this general meeting of the board to order. Roll call.
Mrs. Bibla?
Yes.
Mr. Champy?
Here.
Mrs. Chaitor Zagoric?
Here.
Mr. Webby?
Here.
Mrs. McCurdy?
Here.
Mrs. Campbell?
Here.
Mr. Nardone?
I'm here.
Mr. Boone?
Present.
And Mr. Macri?
I am here.
9 members present.
Right. Again, we will be seeking any public testimony on the agenda items as we move through the committee assignments. Please, when you come up, state your name and address, and please limit to 3 minutes. We do have listed our board meeting dates for 2025, both committee meeting dates and board meeting dates. Four p.m. Right to financial planning. We will be seeking a motion for items 1 through 4. Are
Mo-
there any questions from the board? Any questions or comments from the public? Motion to take a vote?
I'll make a motion.
Second?
Second.
Roll call?
Mrs. Bibla?
Yes.
Mr. Champy?
Yes.
Mrs. Chaitor Zagoric?
Yes.
Mr. Webby?
Yes.
Mrs. McCurdy?
Yes.
Mrs. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Nardone?
Yes.
Mr. Boone?
Yes.
Mr. Macri?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Transportation Committee will be seeking a motion for items 1 and 2. Any questions from the board? Any questions from the public? Seeing none. Motion and a second for vote.
Motion.
Second. Roll call?
Mrs. Bibla?
Yes.
Mr. Champy?
Yes.
Mrs. Chaitor Zagoric?
Yes.
Mr. Webby?
Yes.
Mrs. McCurdy?
Yes.
Mrs. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Nardone?
Yes.
Mr. Boone?
Yes.
And Mr. Macri?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Human Resources will be seeking a motion and a second for items 1 through 6. I will comment on item number 3, the request for the approval of retirement of Mr. Jack Dean. I'd like to say that I worked very closely with Jack the last 3 years. It has been very much a pleasurable experience, but I wholeheartedly want to thank him for his over 20 years of service to this district and this community. He has done everything in his power for the betterment of the district, the students, and the community. I can't thank him enough for his time, and I wish him the best in his future endeavors.
I also have a few comments. I sat in the audience for many, many years before becoming a member of this board, and while sitting there, I heard many words of disenchantment from members of the public about Jack Dean in those days. Only after joining the board did I realize what a great job Jack did in protecting this district and the members of the board. And I think all board members are in agreement that his indoctrination of new members has been a big help to all of us. Our school district has been truly blessed to have this man represent and protect us for the past 20-plus years. Without hesitation, once becoming a district employee, took on added duties in the building and grounds and HR areas. His connections in his profession and the community have served the district well, resulting in a timely and economic advantages for Crestwood. Through his connections and expertise, he has saved the district hundreds of thousands of dollars, and indeed, it may take 3 people to replace him. His love of the district is very evident, from his support of the baseball program to his voluntary broadcasting of boys football, boys and girls basketball games. I would personally and publicly like to thank him for his unwavering support of the district and wish him well in his future endeavors.
Jack, I agree. You've been amazing to this school. And I think Barry's right. I don't think there is any replacing you. I think we're going to fill a position, but you really will never be able to be replaced.
I appreciate all the kind words, and 21 years, it's hard to believe. August of 2003, placed in his solicitor at a meeting at Fairview Elementary, because there was construction ongoing here. And in 21 years, I will say the proudest moments are having 3 Crestwood graduates who are out there who are successful Crestwood graduates, all successful in their careers. The only regret I have is, if you look out at the baseball field, I don't have 4 graduates.
Comments from the public? I seek a motion.
Motion.
Second.
Second.
Roll call.
Mrs. Bibla,
Yes.
Mr. Champy,
Yes.
Mrs. Chaitor Zagoric,
Yes.
Mr. Webby,
Yes.
Mrs. McCurdy,
Yes.
Mrs. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Nordone,
Yes.
Mr. Boone,
Yes.
and Mr. Macri.
Yes.
Motion carried.
So if I may interrupt, I'm going to try not to get emotional, Jack. Everybody kept it together, so I'm going to try myself. So I wrote a few words here, but this comes from the heart. So your dedication, your support, your guidance, your expertise, your pride in your work, your community, and school. Like Mr. Boone said, you protected all of us here and our students and our staff. And you are always available, no matter what time of day I called you, on the weekend, and you always answered in such a pleasant manner. And I can't thank you enough. I'm sure even today we can't even thank you enough, and I probably didn't say it enough in the 4 years that I've worked with you, how much you are appreciated, and I, again, thank you. And I'm honored to have worked with you. I'm sure our paths will cross again, and I look forward to that. And I'm just so proud to have worked with you, and I wish you nothing but the best in your retirement. So thank you again.
I'm 1.5 miles up the road, so I'm not.
Yes, yes.
You know there's concerns, are you going to still announce for the football and basketball games? Not to put you on the spot, but there's a lot of concern over that.
Basketball, I'm already committed to. When, although I can't make the 12th, I told you, Barry, I do have a Christmas party. Football is another story. That is a tough sport to announce, unless I get a spotter, John. All right, thank you.
Move on, academic programs. I'll be seeking a motion and a second for item number 1. Any questions from the board? Any questions from the public? Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Second.
All in favor of item number 1?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Co-curricular, we'll be looking to seek a motion and a second for items 1 through 3. I do have a note on item number 3, that is for the middle school. Please note. Any questions from the board? Any questions from the public? I seek a motion for items 1 through 3.
Motion.
Second.
Roll call?
Mrs. Bibla,
Yes.
Mr. Champy,
Yes.
Mrs. Zagoric,
Yes.
Mr. Webby,
Yes.
Mrs. McCurdy,
Yes.
Mrs. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Nordone,
Yes.
Mr. Boone,
Yes.
and Mr. Macri.
Yes.
Motion carried.
I seek a motion for physical plants for item number 1. Any questions on the board?
Just a comment, Mr. President. I want to give congratulations and a recognition to our maintenance staff, specifically Stan Otto and John Chupka, which is another example of our dedicated Crestwood employees. They found this truck. They weren't out looking for it. They were out on another mission getting a snowplow repaired, came across this vehicle and brought it to the board's attention. But for those two guys out there with their eyes looking for, keeping their eyes open, we wouldn't have found this one. So if you see John or Stan, please thank them.
Any questions from the public? I seek a motion and a second.
Motion. Second.
Roll call?
Ms. Bibla,
Yes.
Mr. Champy,
Yes.
Mrs. Zagoric,
Yes.
Mr. Webby,
Yes.
Mrs. McCurdy,
Yes.
Mrs. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Nordone,
Yes.
Mr. Boone,
Yes.
and Mr. Macri.
Yes.
Motion carried.
And now, are there any non-agenda item questions or comments from the board? Any non-agenda items from the public? Seeing none, our next scheduled committee meeting is January 9th, 2025 at 4 p.m. here in the media room. The next regular board meeting is on January 16th, secondary campus at 6:30. I seek a motion and a second for meeting adjournment.
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting adjourned. Thank you. Drive safe.